So our keynote speaker tonight is Father Timothy Monahan. Father Tim is a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago who serves as pastor of Little Flower Parish in Waukegan, Illinois, starting July 1st of 2026. Father authored the book, Jesus is the Vocation. His topic is a guide for future and present vocation directors and lessons learned from the trenches. Welcome, Father Tim.
Thank you for having me on. It's a real honor. I it's fantastic to be able to do this now that I'm a pastor because it's so helpful to look back and reflect on the 9 years as vocation director and these years of priesthood because it was challenging. It was there just were incredible moments of mentoring, of spiritual fatherhood, of brotherhood, but also of growth. So I just wanted to go over and share a bit of my time as vocation director and what I learned from. So this is published by Vianney Vocations. It's the book Jesus is the Vocation Director. So I just thought I'd share a little bit about myself, about how this book came about, and then some of the lessons learned that pretty much are encapsulated in this book. So as Candace mentioned in her introduction, I've been a priest. I'm a priest here in the Archdiocese of Chicago. I've been a priest 17 years. Very excited to be back in the parish. I love being vocation director. And it's very humbling because you do the service for the church. I was in a parish before that. I did the service for 9 years, and now I'm back in a parish. And so it's exciting to be able to. We have RE starting up. I have all the weekend masses. I just finished confessions before this. We have baptisms, weddings, funerals. It's the life of all of our parishes. So it's exciting to be back. It helped me really appreciate the foundation I had in my own family because I was able to spend time with my parents this summer and reflect with them on this time of transition. I have a younger brother who's a priest. He's a Franciscan missionary in Nicaragua. He's with the CFRs. And he also worked in vocations for a time. So he and I got to talk a lot about that. And so the family, it's always the foundation. It's when you come from a strong family and you've been formed, there's so much that can be done in the seminary because we then can teach the candidate to think philosophically and theologically, how to pray, how to minister. But that human dimension is largely done in the family. So I want to thank all the families that are out there listening because there's the hard education, the discipline, the love, all these things that happen in our families. And if they're not done in the families, it just there's some remedial work that we can do in seminary or in religious life and in priesthood, but in general, what we have is what we get. So thank you to all the families that have done all that heavy lifting or are doing it right now, because I'm extremely grateful to my own family for the lessons I learned. So with the book, Jesus is the Vocation Director. So I was here in Chicago and I was in my 5th year of vocation director, and I talked with the cardinal kind of about what the next steps were, what the plan was, and he indicated that he wanted me to keep going, and things were in a good spot in terms of the ministry. So I started studying for a doctorate at Mundelein Seminary at the University of St. Mary of the Lake. And what kind of stunned me as I was studying was that there was no book or written resource for vocation directors specifically. There are lots of books and pamphlets and studies and guides about helping seminarians or helping discerners, helping spiritual directors, helping seminary formators. But there just was this gap in the literature, very specifically about how to help vocation directors. Some of you might know the book To Save 1,000 Souls. Our friend, Father Brett Brannon, wrote that one, and it's just a classic within the vocation literature field. And it's just a go-to that we give to guys because it's an A to Z guide for discerning the vocation. And I realized there was one time I was reading through that, comparing notes about how I was being vocation director, and I was saying, wait, why isn't there a book for vocation directors themselves? I shouldn't have to read the discerner's book and then try and understand how to do my own job. So I had the support of Mundelein Seminary and some excellent professors there. And the biggest support that I had were brother vocation directors, especially the ones who have gone before me and the ones who served simultaneous with me, because I learned really sitting down with them, asking them a ton of questions. They're very generous in their mentoring. I want to mention especially Father Burkmasters, who is the Diocese of Joliet. He spent a ton of time with me, was very, very helpful. So I really spent time with my brother vocation directors, asking them questions, putting different scenarios in front of them, reflecting with them, praying with them. And again, having it within the academic setting, it really gave me the structure and the support to write the book, to have it reviewed in a very rigorous way. But I also wanted to make sure that it was accessible because the biggest thing in writing it, I just thought of myself as a new vocation director, and there was a wide range of emotions that I had when I started out. And I wanted new vocation directors to have some sort of resource where they didn't feel like they were alone. Because the NCDVD, the National Conference of Diocesan Vocation Directors, they have an excellent conference, and it happens every year. It's usually in August. This year it's going to be in September. But it's massive. There's over 250 priests that are there, all sorts of presenters. Sarah's always there. There's Serra International. And so that's an exciting time. And they do, it's called the Vocari Institute. The initial weekend, they bring in all the new ones, which are over 60. But even that, you're drinking from a fire hose, and it's just a lot of information coming at you. And so you scramble to take your notes, you get all sorts of contacts, but then you're just kind of deer in the headlights for a while. So I really wanted to make sure I wrote the book in order to have something physical that guys could pray with, that they could reflect on, that they could refer back to. So I'm just extremely grateful that it came about when it did. And last year at the conference, I was able to present the book in manuscript form to all the new vocation directors and kind of walk them through it. And then I'll be returning this year in September with the published book to do the same, to give a breakout session where we can reflect on it and talk about it. But I'm very grateful because I've received feedback from different vocation directors who have texted me or sent me an email and just said, "Hey, I'm really excited. Thank you. This has already been a great resource and a big help." And one of the things that it's kind of at the end of the book, there are 5 different chapters, but then at the end of the book, there are the essential documents that are necessary for vocation directors. And they're things that you kind of assemble over time in a somewhat piecemeal fashion. But I just realized it would be so helpful just to have them all right there, where vocation directors could refer to them, could use them, could integrate them into their own offices, because so much of vocation directors' work, you're understanding what other dioceses are doing, and you're just trying to incorporate those practices into your own diocese. It's an incredibly collaborative and fraternal work amongst the vocation directors. So I'll just go through briefly different aspects of the book. One thing that I think is important is this book it's very specifically written for vocation directors, but it's not just for them. So if you know a vocation director, it would be, I think all the new ones have already received a copy, but experienced ones, I'm sure could find it useful. And if they have something to add, I would love to work with the publisher on a future edition. And I'm very open to feedback from my brother vocation directors. The usefulness is also for bishops who want to understand the role better, for brother priests who want to understand what vocation directors are doing. One of my friends, when he read through it last summer, he came up to me and he said, "I've been a vocation director 6 years." He said, "I read it in a day, and I want to give a copy to every priest in my diocese so that they know what the heck I'm doing every day." Because you're the only vocation director in your diocese, and if you're a parish priest, wherever you are as a parish priest, we know what we're doing in parishes with minor variations. But when you're a vocation director, unless you know from doing it, a lot of vocation directors, they can feel a little bit isolated within their presbyterate, because priests are kind of like, "Hey, what do you do? Like, where are the numbers? What are the guys?" So it can be challenging to be able to understand and to explain thoroughly what you're doing as vocation director. So bishops, priests, any religious communities, both men and women who are vocation directors, I've been able to present this and give it to women religious. And if they read through it, they can understand mutatis mutandi, they can understand how to apply it to their community, because there are a lot of principles that would hold up both in the discernment phase, the screening phase, the application, all of that can be applied in a religious context. And I think for a group like Serra International, even just to understand what your vocation director, again, some of the range of emotions, some of the ways in which you can support him, it's just a helpful book to just that gives you kind of an insight into what vocation directors are living. So 5 chapters. First chapter I went through was just um, the expectations. I think that was probably one of the most challenging things was when I started as a vocation director, there were all sorts of different expectations on what this meant. I was incredibly excited. I was elated that the cardinal had asked me. And then the more I got into it, I started realizing, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Do people expect me to somehow fill the seminary with all sorts of vocations? I started to talk to candidates and realize I don't even know how to interview these guys. I felt very isolated because I wasn't in the parish anymore. You're traveling a lot because you want to get a lot done, but it can be a little frenetic. So the expectations are tricky because you want to do a good job and you're just brand new at it. And so it makes it a challenge to just to be able to stay focused. So one of the things for me with the expectations is just making sure guys understand, well, first of all, don't let yourself be crushed by those expectations because you we unfortunately, the average vocation director lasts about 3 to 3.5 years in the United States. And so a lot of them do get discouraged or they get pulled by their bishop into another assignment. So the longer the vocation director can serve for his diocese, the better for the diocese and for that vocation director. So I think it's really important that vocation directors can just have realistic expectations, not be crushed by them. They need to clarify exactly what the bishop wants them to be doing, and that way they can learn what the job is, and then they can let go of the other things. And just as an example, I identified about 11 different tasks that are associated with the title of vocation director. And depending on your diocese and the situation, you might have all 11. I had the first 6, which is largely the like promotion phase, the accompaniment phase, discernment phase, and the screening and application. So I was doing all of that. But once the guys entered seminary, I handed them off to another priest. So I was doing kind of the first half of what we generally call vocation director, but I have brothers who are in other dioceses who do the promotion, accompaniment, screening, application, and then once the guys enter seminary, they're the director of seminarians as well. So the whole first chapter is just basically figure out what you're supposed to be doing and let go of the rest. That way you're not being overwhelmed by some of the confusion or sense of trying to have to do too much. Second chapter is just on how to do the job. And this one, for me, this is really the heart of the book in terms of the principles of how to work with different discerners. And this is maybe a chapter that is most broadly applicable to Serra International, to different vocation directors within religious life, even to priests and deacons or catechists or teachers working in our parishes and our schools. So with this chapter, oftentimes what we'll do is when we see somebody, a young woman or a young man who's interested in religious life or the priesthood, we'll just kind of say, hey, you'd make a good priest, go for it. And that's helpful. It's helpful encouragement. But if we can mentor the person, and then the principles I kind of sketch in that chapter are, let's help all of our young people understand that the first and most fundamental sense of vocation that the Bible and the church give us is that of holiness. Vatican II talks about the universal call to holiness. And that's very important to orient that at the top, because if I have a clear understanding that I'm called to holiness, then that's something that no matter what happens in my life, I can always stay focused on. Whereas if the goal is to be a priest or to be a religious or to be married, what happens if I mess that up or something happens outside of my control and I can't do it? Then there can be this incredible sense of defeat or frustration. So the first sense of vocation is universal call to holiness. It's accessible to everybody, and God is calling everybody to it. The second sense of the way we use the word vocation is a state in life. Am I going to be ordained, consecrated life, holy matrimony, or am I going to be a dedicated single person? So you have 4 possibilities. And the way the church talks about that is that's a structured way to live your holiness. So everybody's called to holiness, but the church recognizes that we need structure in order to live that holiness. And you have four possibilities. So ordained, consecrated life, holy matrimony, and dedicated single life. Then the third sense of vocation is what we call personal vocation. And that's a sense of I'm using my gifts, my talents, the who I am as a unique individual that God has created. He wants me to bring all of myself into my call to holiness and into my state in life. I don't somehow put all that aside and become this kind of carbon copy or robot version of holiness. When we read the lives of the saints, they're all incredibly different in their uniqueness and in their individuality. And so you can see how their personal vocation shines forth. That we're having the upcoming beatification for Fulton Sheen. He was such a character in the way he went about preaching and teaching and evangelizing, but that was different from others who did similar things. So universal call to holiness, state in life, and then your personal vocation. So I found great success in working with young men specifically about that because it helped give them context so that if something happened and they weren't able to enter with the Archdiocese of Chicago, I could insist and say, look, you're still called to holiness. This isn't a no to holiness, but we are able to close that door to the priesthood in Chicago and direct you towards a different path. The other part that's very important, so we have the three notions of holiness, but the other part is when working with the candidate, we look at capacity, freedom, and desire. So the first thing is pretty straightforward. Is this candidate capable of, and I'm looking specifically at diocesan priesthood, but again, you can look at religious life, you could look at marriage, you could look at a specific ministry. The first question we have to start with is capacity. Now, it's a little tricky because the candidate or the discerner, he always leads with desire. Hey, Father, I want to be a priest. But that's actually the last thing we want to look at. We receive that desire, but we want to look first and foremost, are you actually capable of being formed? Can you do the intellectual component? Can you be a man of prayer? Can you live celibacy? Can you be a man of relationship? St. John Paul II, he wrote very beautifully. He said, the humanity of the priest must be a bridge and not an obstacle. So can the humanity of the priest be a bridge between God and his people? So that's the whole aspect of capacity. Is this candidate capable? If he is, we can move forward. If he's not capable, then let's redirect him to where he's being called. And an example of that would be sometimes let's say I'm talking with a 34-year-old male who is, he's in the trades, he's making a good living, he's faithful, he's a man of prayer, but he hasn't been in an academic setting since high school. Maybe had a few college courses, maybe had some college with his apprenticeship, but basically he's been out for 15 or 16 years. When I've met with those guys, I'll say, do you think it's realistic at this point? You have to get a bachelor's degree, you're going to study for a master's, and you're going to have probably, let's say you fast track your bachelor's degree, let's say you can get it in 3 years. After that, you're still going to have another 7 years of studies. So you're looking at 10 years of intense studies. Is that feasible for you as a 35-year-old? And every single one I talked to would say, I can't do that. And I'd say, I don't think God's calling you to do that. So let's find the path that he's calling you on. But that's happening right at capacity. Whereas if we engage with desire, we can spend a lot of time talking about his desires for the priesthood that won't be realized because he's not capable of undertaking what the church is asking him to do. So we start with capacity, then we look at freedom. And this is where the large chunk of discernment happens, because all of us have areas in our life where we're lacking in freedom. And so we want to identify with the candidate, all right, where are you not free? So let's look at, it can be something like incredible student debt. If he has a lot of student debt, it could be wounds and trauma from his past, from his family of origin, or from past relationships. It can look at struggles with chastity. It could look at different lies that he believes about himself or misconceptions about the priesthood. So there are all these areas in which the obstacles need to be identified, fears he might have. Father Brandon has an excellent portion in his book, To Save a Thousand Souls, where he just goes through all the different fears that guys have about becoming priests. And those are very real and need to be looked at. So we want to see, is he capable? Is he free? And again, a lot of work in that area of freedom. And that can, depending on the candidate, that can happen in a few months. It could be a year, 2 years, 3 years. Each candidate's different. So we want to make sure we give them a good accompaniment in that area of freedom with the help of a spiritual director, with the help sometimes of counseling, a good friend group, etc. So capacity, freedom, and then we go to desire, because as the candidate has identified that he is capable, or the church affirms that, and that he has grown in his freedom, there's been some real healing, then he can move into a place where he's really looking into his heart and saying, all right, God, how have you made me? What do you want from me? And what do I want to do? How do I want to give my life as a gift? And that's where in this area, it's interesting because I've worked with several guys and we notice the difference between attraction and admiration. So attraction, a guy says, I want to join that brotherhood of the priests. I want to be a priest. I want to be celebrating the Mass. I want to be hearing confessions. I want to be baptized. I want to be preaching. I want to be leading a parish. He can see there's this deep attraction of, I want this for myself. Now, admiration, it's interesting. And the candidate that's attracted to the priesthood will make sacrifices. Whereas the candidate who he can be very capable, he can be free, but when you really dig down in that area of desire, he's not actually attracted to the priesthood. He admires the priesthood. He thinks priesthood is amazing, but it's always from a distance. And so when you ask him, well, what draws you to the priesthood? Why do you want to be a priest? He'll say things that are, again, it's admirable. He'll talk about how wonderful the priesthood is from a distance. And I'll say, well, do you want to do that? And then when you really get down to it, he'll say, I mean, maybe, I don't know. And then again, you can see it can be a little confusing, but there's some subtlety there, because if they don't want to make sacrifices, if they don't really want to be a priest, then again, we can redirect on that path of holiness. So again, that for me, that second chapter is what I was extremely helpful in my own development of the ministry and what I was able to share with other brothers. And I've gotten some really good feedback from brother priests who are working in vocations, because it just helps them structure the conversations they're having with these candidates and then identify within those conversations how to move forward. The third chapter is it's all about the relationships that you develop, and this is where I'm extremely grateful to Joe and Martha Maringer, who were in Chicago and who helped restart the Serra chapter there, as well as people like Tony and Joe Yaku and so many others within the Serra Club, because these are people that when I started out, we didn't have a chapter of the Serra Club in Chicago. We didn't have a parent group of seminarians. I didn't have a vocation committee to help me discern with guys. I had a real sense of, like, again, when I go back to talking about those expectations, I just had a sense of like the weight of the world on my shoulders. And then year by year by year, there just was more and more support around me. And so that third chapter really tries to help the vocation director develop as much support as possible from brother priests, from a leadership team, a vocation committee that can help them interview candidates, forming a Serra chapter, having parents of seminarians and priests that he can meet with, even leveraging the relationship he has with his existing seminarians to make sure that they can be incorporated into events. My fourth chapter looks at it's getting a little more interior into the life of the vocation director. The first three chapters are looking much more on the externals of what is entailed in the job. But the fourth chapter really looks at the interior life of the vocation director, because one challenge that we've seen historically is that vocation directors, because of the different pressures and expectations, they can not understand what's going on inside themselves, and they're not always taking care of themselves, and then that can put them in difficult situations. So just within my region, when I was vocation director, unfortunately, we had two priests leave the priesthood during their time as vocation directors. And I, there were a lot of different things at play within themselves and within their dioceses, but it was heartbreaking to see and to witness. So I just really wanted to encourage the vocation directors who are in the ministry to make sure they understand, with some different prayer exercises for some different questions about how they're doing in their relationship with God and their priestly identity, all these different things to develop, because the better we know ourselves, then the more we can make a gift of ourselves to this ministry, because it is a demanding ministry. And then my final chapter is just all on freedom of the vocation director and what fruitfulness looks like, because earlier I was talking about the freedom of the candidate, but the last chapter is, again, it's a reflection using scripture, using some of the works of our Holy Fathers and different theologians, but it's really trying to look at, it's on the catechism as well, it's trying to say the vocation director himself has to remain in a place of freedom. And what I mean by that is the vocation director can't be using discerners to fill up the poster just to make himself feel better if they're not good candidates. So the vocation director has to be vigilant on what's going on inside himself so that he can say, all right, am I in a good place with God? And do I experience his great love for me as his beloved son and as his priest, so that I can then look at this candidate and say, what's best for you? Instead of saying, well, you need to get into seminary, we need priests, and basically manipulate or guilt the person into it, because it's not going to work. At some time, that's going to fail sooner or later. And so those are important questions to wrestle with, which all the vocation directors I know have to wrestle with. But as we grow in freedom, then we can be the best vocation directors possible, because we're not there trying to use or kind of manipulate the discerners for our own benefit, but what is truly best for the church and for each one of them. And the final thing I look at is just fruitfulness, because that's ultimately, it's the easiest question that everybody loves to ask vocation director. How are the numbers? Hey, Father, how are the numbers? How are the numbers? And one of our vocation directors, they would always kind of laugh. They say, everyone says it's not about the numbers, but it's about the numbers. And so everybody wants to know that. And so one of my brothers, for I think it was 4 years, he did not have a single seminarian entering seminary. And I admire him because he was able to persevere in that ministry without giving up. And now the diocese is seeing the fruit of his hard work. But vocational fruit develops very slowly. It depends upon our families, the health of our parishes, the health of our priesthood, the health of our bishop. Like, all these things are impacting the long term, and the culture, the ambient culture impacts vocations tremendously. So I just thought it was very important for the vocation director, as he stays in a place of freedom, to understand that fruitfulness is not always something that we can readily identify, because we walk with these men and we continue into seminary, but basically seminary is 7 to 8 years long, and then you need another 5 years after that to really understand, is this priest going to make it? So if a priest has been ordained 5 years, in general, statistically, he'll make it and have a good and fruitful priesthood. So the timeline is just very long, and so we have to be very humble and patient with ourselves and not be too hard on ourselves in terms of what actually there is for fruitfulness. So that's the book. I know it's not going to be a new Theo of Golden in terms of a New York Times bestseller or Amazon #1 list, but I just hope it can help some of the vocation directors, because it was a joy to write. There were some obviously hard moments writing it, but I'm really glad it came together. I should do this as well. It's not a huge book. You see that? Not big. So it's relatively readable. And I'm extremely grateful now that I've finished 9 years. I look back on it, and again, my heart is filled with gratitude for my own years as a priest. I look at the men I worked with who are now in seminary. I'll be able to go to their ordinations for the next 9 years, and those are all guys that I was able to work with. So it's a gift that'll keep on giving, and God willing, they'll be at my parish as parochial vicars, and I'll be able to work with them, at different events to encourage future priests. So I'm just incredibly grateful to all the support I receive from the Cardinal, from my brother priests and bishops, from, again, the Serra Club, all the different families, the seminarians, my own family. I have great friends here in Chicago and brother priests who are outside Chicago. Just extremely grateful. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and happy to take any questions you might have.